Amendment number 0370, the Secretary will read.
On page 14, after line 33, insert the following.
Last line.
43.3308.020.
Senator Wilson Linda.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I would like to move amendment number 370 to be adopted.
If you would like to, please feel free to go ahead and do so.
Thank you. I would like to. Thank you. I move to adopt. Thank you. All right.
Senator Wilson moves adoption of amendment number 0370. Remarks, Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there's been a lot of misinformation surrounding this firearms data here that we've heard in the last few weeks. Evidence is the several flagrant statements that have been made in the intent section in this bill. And as an example, there's a solid evidence that the firearms are used in self-defense situation. The intent section misstates otherwise. Many times, even just the fact that there is a firearm in use, or sorry, there's a firearm in present is enough to thwart the crime that's going to occur. In fact, there's about 2 million times a year that it's been documented that crimes are thwarted simply because the intended victim was armed and prepared and let the criminal know and be aware that they are armed. And then this figure is also assumed to be much higher because many people don't report that. We heard in committee by the prime sponsor of this bill that he himself admitted that he doesn't know much about firearms, and yet he felt compelled to run this bill. And he was entirely unaware of how the ban would actually work. There's a high probability of why we're here today is because we're discussing a ban on firearms. It isn't just what proponents claim it to be. What I would like to do, this bill here, or this amendment, we would like to know on an annual basis what actual firearms are used in gun-related deaths and injuries that don't include suicide or self-inflicted injuries. And I think that the information would be quite enlightening because right now we need to know what's actually happening in the state. And the FBI will collect some of this data, but states themselves, it's voluntary to be able to give this information to the FBI. So we need accurate and complete data, and I would like to be able to make informed choices on this body with that data. Thank you.
Further remarks? Senator Kruderer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to respectfully request a no vote on this amendment. The Office of Firearm Safety and Violence Prevention already has the authority to collect the data that this amendment seeks. They already have the ability to work with law enforcement agencies, county prosecutors, researchers, and public health agencies on data collection, and they can fill in any gaps that may be existing already. So this amendment is truly not needed. I just want to say one last thing about the good member who brought this bill. He comes from a place of wanting to protect his community. It's a genuine and sincere desire to represent and protect his community. And I don't think there's any reason to discuss any other motive for him. Thank you.
Further remarks, Senator Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we heard a couple of bills ago that if something is not measured, it's not managed. And I would say the same is true here. So, sure, maybe the Violence Prevention Agency could do this, but this bill just tells them to do it. Because they've had the ability to do it all along and they haven't. So maybe if we just tell them, it will be the impetus that they need to provide us with sound data. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further remarks, Senator Dhingra.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since it was my legislation that created the Office of Firearms Safety and Violence Prevention, I just wanted this body to know and remind them that this office was created after the King County Shots Fired program that does exactly that, where we are in the process of ensuring that we have the ability to track all violence related to gun deaths, any violence that's related to guns. We've started that in King County. The hope is through this office, we're going to build that out for the entire state. It unfortunately cannot happen right away. But this is what the intention of this office was to begin with, is data collection that is accurate, that we can continue to make informed decisions on. That work has started, but it takes a lot longer when you're dealing with the entire state. So I just want this body to be aware that that work continues, will continue, and is extremely prioritized. So we will continue on this path on being data-driven, collecting the data we need, and making sure we can make legislation in response to that data. And so this amendment is indeed not needed. Thank you.
Further remarks? Senator Short.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciating the debate on this amendment, and I'm glad that data is going to be given, but we are doing a very substantial piece of legislation here. A piece of legislation that takes away the right, potentially, of the individual to keep and bear arms. May I read from Article 1, Section 24 of our state constitution, Mr. President?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. The right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired. This bill impairs that. I think it would be incumbent upon us to have that data before we start making decisions of this magnitude. We know that we are challenged all across the state and the nation, and we have talked passionately about the challenges that our communities face. You know, the rampant crime, drug addiction, drug use, the overdose deaths, gangs, and just the things, you know, these things that are happening in the behavioral health challenges that we know individuals have. We talked actually recently in the Rules Committee, Mr. President, about, you know, people falling through the cracks, people feeling hopeless. But why is it on the backs of the citizen who abides by the law? Why is it on their back to doing this bill to take away their rights? We need to continue and should be doing the data collection. We should be doing more with behavioral health. We should be doing more with crime, not less, Mr. President. And I think as we move forward, the significance of this amendment is, yeah, the data's coming, but we're doing this first. I would hope we would put the bill down, support this amendment, and really make sure that this gets done and put the bill down. I urge a yes on this amendment.
Further remarks? Senator Fortunato.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I read from a recent email from the WASPIC on crime and statistics?
Is it germane to the amendment?
It is germane in that it gives us information, and then we want to be able to assess through this amendment the accuracy and how that's relevant to our state, to give us, the legislator, information on how to proceed.
The standard is it be germane to the amendment. With that in mind, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the reasons that it is important to be able to accumulate this data is to be able to understand why we have this increase in certain amounts of crime. Homicides up 18% in Washington, down 4% nationally. Homicides in 2015 to 17, up 96%, 44% nationally. Violent crime up 55% in Washington state. The number of homicides this year are on track to exceed that. So what is the reason for this, and who is actually committing these crimes? That's the information that we need to accumulate. We were told, Mr. President, when we adopted 594, if you recall, enhanced background checks, that was going to protect us. Not a few years later, 1639, that was going to protect us. It was going to ensure that only certain people were able, and we were going to have this enhanced background check and more an waiting periods and everything else on firearms. And that was going to protect us. And yet here we are today talking about an infringement or an impairment of our state constitutional rights, which is more stringent than the national Second Amendment. shouldn't we at least have the data to be making intelligent decisions? So I urge your support on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further remarks? Senator Trudeau.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did want to remind this body, I went ahead and looked up actually the legislation that created the Office of Firearm Violence and Research Center, and because I was curious, because there are many of us that really like data, and so I was curious about this. I'm like, great, we love data. Unfortunately, what I found was that was strictly along party lines. So I remain confused as we have this discussion about how now data is important, even though folks offering the amendment are likely going to vote no on the underlying bill. So, Mr. President, I would just ask respectfully for a no vote, and that we all reflect on the importance of data, and hopefully we can come together and work on data-driven solutions in the future. Thank you so much.
All right. The rules require that remarks be germane to the amendment before us. The rules require that there be no questioning of intent or motive. Speakers from both sides of the aisle have bordered on violating these. Bluntly put, the gavel's going to be a little quicker. This is an emotion-charged policy debate. Respect the rules, please. Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Office of Firearm Safety is now, we have it, regardless of who voted for it. It is here. And so we'd like to have the data. That's all we're asking for, because it's important to have the data in order for us to make informed decisions. So I hope that outside of the fact that this has been around for 2 years now and have received very little information, I'm hoping that instructing them to get this information will help us down the line inform our decisions. Thank you.
There are no further remarks. The question before us is adoption of amendment number 0370. As many are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The noes appear to have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not adopted.